You'd be amazed at how effective using something unusual like wood filler or old miniature sprues are to save money on your scratch building projects. So let me show you 7 scratch building hobby hacks to help you get the most out of your hobby budget. Hack number 1. Texture paint is an easy way to add some nice texture to bases or terrain pieces. But it can be quite expensive, especially if you need to use a lot of it. However, you can just make your very own DIY texture paint using wood filler, which you can buy for cheap at your local discount or hardware store. To make the texture paint, I mix a bunch of wood filler, sand and some brown paint or ink together. Mix this well until you get the color you want and then simply apply it to the bases of your model or terrain piece. Do keep in mind that it might crack while drying if you apply it really thickly. The reason we add the color beforehand is in case the texture ever chips or breaks. If we only paint over it, the part where it breaks would be white, like the color of the wood filler. But if we break the already colored texture paint, the insides are brown, which makes it blend in a lot better with your base or terrain piece. Hack number 2. Spray primers and varnishes for your miniatures are very expensive at around 15 euros a can. But what if I were to tell you that there's an alternative you can use at just a fraction of the price? I prime and varnish most of my miniatures and terrain pieces using spray cans like these, which I buy at my local discount or hardware store. You can see me use them in basically all of my previous videos. These specifically cost me around 3 euros a can, which means I can buy 5 of these cans for the same price as 1 of these, which is insane if you ask me. However, not every cheap spray primer will be suitable for your miniatures. Gloss primers usually don't take paint very well, for example. So test it first on something other than your miniatures, like a piece of sprue. Which also brings us to our next hack. Hack number 3. Whenever you buy miniatures, about half of the plastic you get is sprue. To me, this has always felt like a bit of a waste, if you're just supposed to throw it all out. But what if I told you you should actually save your sprues? There are quite a few good uses for them. You can cut them down to make them look like steel beams, which is great for bases or terrain. Or you can cut them down to make them look like gold bars or even some small crystals. For the gold bars, it's best to use some straight pieces of sprue and cut the ends at a slight angle. For the crystals, you can simply use a sharp hobby knife or some snips to cut them into the shape you want. And after a quick paint job, this is what they could all look like. This also works very well because you can also use plastic cement to glue these pieces together, which is a lot stronger than super glue or PVA since it chemically bonds the pieces of plastic together. I personally use Tamiya thin plastic cement, which is considered to be the gold standard of plastic glues. And it's also a bit cheaper than the Warhammer equivalent. Hack number 4. Superglue dries quickly and is thus extremely useful for your scratch building projects. However, it does have 2 big downsides compared to PVA. Superglue becomes a lot more brittle over time and is also a lot more expensive if you use a lot of it. So how do you combine the strengths of both of these glues? Well, when gluing 2 things together, you can dot some superglue on the sides or on the corners and apply some PVA on the rest of the gluing area. This way the fast drying superglue will hold the parts in place while the PVA can dry. This allows you to keep working and it also saves you time and superglue as well. Hack number 5. There is an amazing scratch building material out there which you can get your hands on very cheaply or even for free. Any guesses? I'm talking about coffee stirrers, of course. Coffee stirrers are extremely versatile. For example, you can use them to cover the walls of a building, make window frames, or even a wooden floor base. I split the wider stirrers lengthwise using my hobby knife to get more skill appropriate lengths. To get the best result, you can use a hobby knife to scratch up the sides of the coffee stirrers so the wood doesn't look as straight and it looks a bit more worn and used. To glue them on, you can also use the previous hack by applying some PVA in the middle and then using some super glue to hold the boards in place while the PVA dries. And as a bonus hack, you can even skip the priming step and just use a wash directly onto the coffee stirrers. Similarly to when you apply a stain to real wood furniture, for example. Hack number 6. There is yet another cheap scratch building material out there which you might even already own, and it's wooden skewers. You can use these to make similar things to the coffee stirrers, like the door on a building for example. And since they are round, you can also use them as posts to make a nice fence together with some coffee stirrers. Just glue the coffee stirrers onto the skewers and stick them into a base. In this case I used a piece of EVA foam as the base, and I added some nice flocking on top of it. And just like the coffee stirrers, you can simply use a wash to paint it instead of priming it first. Hack number 7. If you ever eat something like cereal or crackers, which come in a box like this, don't throw it out once you're done using it. This thin cardboard, or cardstock, is a perfect material for scratch building. You can simply cut it into small squares and use it as roof tiles for a building for example. And it's also great to add detail to other projects like the paneling on this orc vehicle for example. However, if you want to save this cardstock, don't just save the entire box. This takes up a lot of space, so I usually just cut it into a bunch of smaller pieces using a ruler and a hobby knife. As you can see, about half of these pieces are too damaged, have glue on them, or are too small to be worth saving. The pieces we have left are now a lot easier to store and use later on as well. If you want to see me apply some of these hacks on a real scratch build project, check out this video where I make an entire fantasy building completely from scratch. And if you'd like even more budget-friendly hobby hacks like these, check out this video.